For the fifth time in 19 years, the United Methodist Church and the Ohio Council of Churches are successfully mobilizing tens of thousands of voters from many faith communities to vote against casino gambling in Ohio.
The gambling industry has mounted a well-funded and deceptive marketing campaign to introduce predatory gambling into our neighborhoods.
Issue 3 on the ballot in November is a dangerous proposal which inserts new language into the Ohio Constitution and creates a monopoly to run casinos in 4 Ohio communities.
We call for an extensive effort to stop casino gambling from harming our citizens for these reasons.
Well, typically people assume that when religious groups speak out against casino gambling that it's exclusively a moral issue, but the reality is that our social principles have stood against gambling from the beginning because we know it's bad economic practice and that it preys upon those persons in society often least able to afford these kinds of essentially regressive taxes.
Yeah, I've always felt that it's bad public policy to support gambling in a state because it's addictive to the state. First of all, the state's against it. They know it's bad. And then they get hooked because somebody convinced them it's a business plan. It's just a way of getting revenues. But then when those revenues start to get declining, then the state actually has to promote gambling so that the revenues will stay up. And so these Powerball games from several states, the reason they're introduced is because gambling starts to fade after a while. And so they get bigger and bigger pots. But to have the state actually promoting an addictive behavior is really very counterproductive. So for example, if they say, you know, gambling revenues are going to be going towards education, when they start to fall, then we don't have a way of funding education. So the state actually promotes gambling and addiction in order to keep education going, and that's a huge problem.
Well, the whole concept of gambling is that if you make a small investment, there's a big pot of gold waiting on the other end. The reality is that the industry cannot survive or generate the kind of profits it does unless there is no pot of gold at the other end. And so it creates this illusion that you know, rather than having to earn one's way, one can win one's way into prosperity.
You've seen it happen. You've been in to pay for your gas after pumping the gas into your car, and you've seen somebody checking out ahead of you, and they stop and they want to order those little, lottery tickets or so, and they've got a little child with them or so, and the little child looks at them, well, what are those? And the mom says, well, come on, we've got to move, and not explain it. But it gives the image that if you put your money here, then you can get a return on that rather than study hard and get a good job.
There's no question that that the proponents of issue 3 have seized upon a deep concern within the life of Ohioans right now. There is fear about our economy. There is a concern about increasing jobs, and so to play the jobs card, you have to admit, is smart politics. But the reality is that this industry, particularly casino gambling, is not likely to generate anywhere near the kinds of jobs that the proponents are advocating. Studies from surrounding states where there is casino gambling indicate that there's not an increase in jobs, but rather a job transfer. In other words, the mom and pop operations that are in these neighborhoods are likely to go out of business because they can't compete with the casino. So the waitress that was working in a small restaurant is likely to be the person who's going to work on the buffet line in the casino. That's not a new job. That's simply losing a job and moving across the street to take another job. And that's the illusion of the job argument.
Well, if you look around the country, they move in precisely when cities and states are having economic problems. In fact, they move into individuals. Individuals who are having economic problems say that, well, if you just gamble, then that'll solve your problems. So by their very nature, they come in and make their case. And they do it with politicians that can't find better examples. They get politicians saying this is good economic policy when they would not do that in good economic times, and that makes them predatory. In fact, several years ago in Detroit, when they were fighting casino gambling, one of the ads that was taken out against it showed Jesus on a cross. And he's looking down and he's watching the soldiers gamble over his garment. And the title to the picture says, "Some very important people have looked down upon gambling." I think Jesus would look down on this predatory behavior and say, I can't believe that the state of Ohio would put it in their Constitution.
Well, those figures are figures that are gathered from researching the impact of casino gambling in other states that have extensive casino gambling operations. The obvious costs are the increase in crime and the cost it takes to control that crime. Nearly 40% of all white-collar crime is gambling related, so you have the social costs of adjudicating, first investigating and adjudicating those crimes. I think, though, that the real cost is the human cost it will take on families, where we'll see an increase in suicide rates, abuse of children and spouses, foreclosures, bankruptcies, and every time you have a family disintegrate because one or more members are addicted to gambling, the rest of us, society as a whole, assumes the cost and care of children, of spouses, of families, of taking care of those unpaid mortgages. And when you add that all up, these figures stand. The state's going to end up, you and I, through our taxes, will end up paying $3 for every dollar the state realizes from casino gambling.
There's huge hidden cost in gambling. A lot of people don't realize it, but that once you start winning, so-called, when you start getting returns, then they start treating you as a return customer, a favored customer. They comp your rooms and so forth. And what happens is that people think that, well, they've got the magic touch. And so the bigger ticket you have, the more they get from you. And then all of a sudden you start losing because it's always programmed against you from winning in the long run. So then people who think that they've got the touch will find money in order to spend on it. Sometimes it's family money, but often what happens, they end up saying, well, if I could just do it one more night, one more week, I can cover it. So they actually embezzle money. Major amounts of money that gets embezzled is to cover gambling and debts. And then what happens is, like you said, there's costs of investigating and prosecuting these people, but even the incarceration, the penalty for embezzlement, is a cost to society that the gambling companies that run these casinos don't cover. So in essence, they take the profit, but then the cost of the damage is borne by all the citizens.
I think there's another cost that is sort of a hidden cost as well, and that's the deterioration of care for one's most prized, beloved relationships, the children. Just one very quick story. I was serving in Iowa at the time that casino gambling came into Iowa. And it wasn't long before the casinos started putting daycare centers right in the casinos, because it allowed young mothers with children to be able to come and spend the entire day in the casino gambling while their children were being looked after by somebody else. You begin to wonder, at least I wonder, what is the cost to that child? What is the cost to that family of being raised in that kind of environment?